The champagne was already flowing when I arrived at the hotel. Cameras flashed near the entrance. Business executives shook hands beneath crystal chandeliers. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying silver trays while a string quartet played near the marble staircase. And then there was me, Edmund Whitaker, 69 years old, wearing a plain navy jacket, an old pair of leather shoes, and carrying no entourage. I had come alone. I wasn't looking for attention. I only wanted to see my son. Colum stood near the center of the lobby beside his wife Bianca. He looked proud. I understood why. The hotel was beautiful. For a moment, I felt proud too. Then Bianca noticed me. Her smile disappeared. She looked at my clothes, then at the guests around us. "You're here?" I smiled. "I wouldn't miss your opening." She glanced toward Callum. Then she lowered her voice. "Guests like you enter through the back." I thought I'd misheard her. "What?" She smiled without warmth. "If you're staying here, earn your room." She picked up a folded staff apron from a nearby service cart and held it toward me. Colum looked at me. Then he laughed. Not nervously. Not awkwardly. He actually laughed. Something inside me went very still. I looked around the lobby again. The marble floor. The enormous chandelier. The gold lettering mounted behind the reception desk. 27 million. The Whitaker Legacy Hotel. My eyes remained on those words for a second longer than they should have. Then I took the apron. I didn't argue. I didn't ask Colum why he was laughing. I simply walked toward the service corridor. Behind me, the music continued. Nobody followed. That evening, I didn't go home. I changed into the staff uniform and spent the next several hours carrying supplies, clearing tables, and watching the hotel operate from places most guests never saw. People spoke differently around employees. They complained openly. They revealed things. And I listened. Before we continue, subscribe and join our growing family for emotional stories of family, betrayal, justice, and unforgettable life lessons. And tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. I love knowing where everyone is listening from. For 7 days, my son believed his father had finally been reduced to a servant. What he didn't know was that I had a reason for staying, and it had nothing to do with earning a room. I wasn't always a man who could afford to build hotels. I started with small properties nobody else wanted. Old buildings, neglected lots, houses that needed more work than most people thought they were worth. Colum grew up watching me work. When he was old enough, I took him to construction sites. He learned how walls were framed, why foundations mattered, and why the cheapest material wasn't always the cheapest decision. Those were some of my favorite years. He was my only son, but he was also my companion. Years later, Colum told me he wanted to build something of his own. A luxury hotel. He had the vision. I had the land. So I gave him the opportunity. I didn't simply hand him ownership. I structured everything carefully because I wanted him to build the business himself. Colum was proud. And I was proud of him. Then Bianca came into his life. She was charming, confident, and came from a wealthy family. Her father, Gerald Voss, owned several businesses and knew everyone worth knowing. I welcomed them. I thought we were becoming one family. But Gerald asked questions that bothered me. How much had the hotel cost? What were the projected revenues? What would the property be worth after opening? Bianca once said, almost casually, "Once this hotel succeeds, everything changes for us." I remembered that sentence. Not because it sounded ambitious. Because she said us. Not Colum. Not her. I had given my son the chance to build his own legacy. I never imagined the people standing beside him would soon start treating my generosity as something they had inherited. Construction changed Colum. At first, he called me whenever something went wrong. Then Gerald began answering those problems. He introduced investors, suppliers, bankers, consultants. Before long, Colum was spending more time with Bianca's family than with me. I tried not to take it personally. Then I started noticing what they were building around the hotel. Not just a business, a lifestyle. Gerald talked about expansion before the first room had opened. Bianca discussed luxury cars. They planned private investments using projected hotel income. One evening, I heard Gerald tell Colum, Once this place opens, you'll have an asset worth 27 million. I looked at my son. He smiled. Can you believe it, Dad? I asked quietly. Do you know exactly what you're signing? Colum laughed. Dad, they know luxury hospitality. I nodded toward the plans. Do they know the land? His smile faded for a moment. Then he laughed again. You're still thinking like a property developer. That sentence stayed with me, because I wasn't thinking about construction anymore. I was thinking about how quickly my son had stopped asking questions. Gerald kept making promises based on revenue the hotel hadn't earned. Loans. Expansion. New investments. Every commitment depended on tomorrow's success. But tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. And the hotel wasn't even open. I said nothing. I had learned long ago that people rarely listen when they believe you're standing between them and their dream. They kept repeating the same number 27 million, as if saying it often enough could turn an assumption into ownership. By the time the hotel opened, Bianca had stopped talking about it as a business. She called it their empire. The lobby was beautiful, but beauty doesn't pay invoices. Within the first month, I noticed things the family didn't want to discuss. Occupancy was below projection. The restaurant was losing money. Operating costs were climbing. 3 managers had already resigned. Yet Bianca ordered imported furniture for the penthouse suites. Gerald hosted dinners that cost more than some employees earned in a month. And Colum kept signing contracts. One afternoon, I found him studying another expansion proposal. You're already planning another property? He smiled. That's how you grow. With what money? The hotel will cover it. That answer frightened me. The hotel hadn't even proven it could cover itself. Then I saw Gerald leave his office carrying a folder. He dropped several papers when he turned the corner. I helped gather them. One page caught my eye. Lender agreement. Another contained a phrase I hadn't expected to see. Ground rights. My stomach tightened. I handed the papers back without reading further. Gerald barely looked at me. Thanks. I walked away. That evening, I called Martin Shaw, the attorney who had handled my property matters for years. I need you to review the hotel's contractual structure. He asked why. I saw something involving ground rights. There was silence. I'll look at it. 2 days later, Martin called. His voice had changed. Edmund, whoever is making these commitments hasn't read the original agreement carefully. What does that mean? It means they're treating something as though they own it. I stared out the window. Do they? Martin paused. Not in the way they seem to believe. I didn't ask him to explain. Not yet. For the first time, I wondered whether my son had been given a hotel, or merely been handed a business he didn't understand. I stayed at the hotel for 7 days. Not as an owner. Not as Colum's father. As the old man everyone believed had been put in his place. Each morning, I put on the same staff apron Bianca had handed me. I carried boxes. Cleared tables. Helped elderly guests find their rooms. Sometimes I stood behind the service counter and listened. People speak differently when they don't think the important people are listening. A manager complained about unpaid overtime. A supplier called twice about an overdue invoice. One supervisor quietly admitted that occupancy numbers were being presented more favorably to investors than they really were. Then I noticed Colum approving another expensive purchase. The hotel was losing money, yet he was spending as though every room were already booked. Gerald was worse. He used projected hotel revenue to make promises outside the hotel. Expansion. Investments. Financing. One evening, a tired employee found me stacking glasses. Sir, he said quietly, this place is bleeding money. I looked at him. Who knows? He gave a bitter laugh. Everyone except the people running it. That sentence stayed with me, because I knew exactly what he meant. Colum saw the grand lobby. Bianca saw luxury. Gerald saw leverage. But the employees saw what happened after the cameras disappeared. Every night, I returned to the small room I'd been given and wrote down what I'd witnessed. Not gossip. Facts. Who had signed what? Which bills were overdue? Which promises had been made? Which numbers didn't match? By the 7th night, the notebook on my bedside table was nearly full, and the picture was becoming clear. My son wasn't simply running a struggling hotel. He was standing inside a financial structure built on assumptions that could collapse the moment someone questioned him. Every night, I went back to my small room and wrote down what I'd seen. By the seventh morning, I had enough information to understand exactly how deep they'd gone. Martin didn't work alone. He brought in a forensic accountant who had spent 20 years untangling businesses that looked successful from the outside and were collapsing underneath. 3 days later, Martin came to my room with 2 thick folders. "Edmund, we have a problem." I already knew. The hotel borrowed against projected income that hasn't materialized. Gerald has promised investors returns based on numbers the hotel isn't producing. They've committed to expansion before this property has stabilized. He opened another folder. There's more. Suppliers have been given long-term commitments, and Column has personally guaranteed some of them. I looked at the pages. How much? Enough that a bad quarter could become a serious crisis. Then he showed me the agreements concerning the land. There were restrictions on how the property could be used, financed, transferred, and represented to outside parties. Martin tapped one paragraph. These commitments could create a serious problem. I stared at the document. "Do you want me to stop them?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not yet." Martin looked surprised. "Edmund, they're digging themselves deeper." "I know." "Then why wait?" I closed the folder. "Because if I stop them now, Column will only believe his father ruined his dream." I wanted him to understand what his choices had created. Meanwhile, Column was celebrating. Bianca invited friends to the hotel and proudly walked them through the penthouse. "This is only the beginning," she told them. Gerald was already discussing another luxury development. They spoke about millions as casually as other people discuss groceries. But behind those conversations were loans, guarantees, deadlines, and promises. Money they didn't have. Security they didn't fully control. And commitments they didn't understand. I watched quietly. They thought the hotel was making them rich. In reality, every new promise they made was pulling another thread from the same rope. By the second day, the first crack appeared. A major supplier threatened to stop deliveries because 2 invoices were overdue. Column called it a misunderstanding. I knew better. On the 3rd day, a lender questioned the hotel's revenue figures. Gerald dismissed the concern. Investors are nervous before every major launch. But the lender wasn't an investor. He wanted his money back. On the 4th day, I watched Gerald corner Column near the elevators. "You need to sign this financing agreement today." Column hesitated. "Isn't that a little aggressive?" Gerald's voice hardened. "Opportunity doesn't wait." Column signed. I wrote down the time. On the 5th day, Column joined Bianca on the terrace. I was carrying a tray nearby when I heard him say, "Once the next investment closes, we'll be untouchable." Bianca kissed him. I kept walking. By the 6th day, a business journalist contacted the hotel requesting an interview about its extraordinary valuation. Gerald was delighted. He immediately turned it into an event. A press conference. Cameras. Investors. Business leaders. He planned to announce another expansion and describe the hotel as the foundation of their growing empire. That afternoon, my phone rang. "Martin, everything is ready." I stepped into an empty corridor. "Are you certain?" His answer was immediate. "The documents speak for themselves." I looked through the glass toward the lobby. Column was laughing with Bianca. They looked like a young couple who believed the world belonged to them. I didn't tell him what tomorrow would bring. That evening, I removed the staff apron for the last time. I folded it carefully and placed it inside my small suitcase. 7 days earlier, Bianca had handed it to me because she thought I was beneath her. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be wearing it. The next morning, my son expected to announce the future of his hotel. Instead, he was about to discover who had owned its foundation all along. The press conference began at 10 in the morning. Television cameras lined the back wall. Reporters crowded around the microphones. Several investors sat in the first row, expecting Gerald to announce the hotel's next expansion. Column stood beside Bianca, wearing the same confident smile I'd seen all week. Gerald stepped toward the podium. "Today, we're proud to introduce the next chapter of the Voss family's hospitality empire. A screen behind him displayed the hotel's valuation. 27 million. Applause filled the room. I stood at the entrance. No suit. No expensive watch. Just the same plain clothes I'd worn while working behind the hotel for 7 days. Gerald noticed me first. His smile disappeared. What are you doing here? I walked past him. Nobody stopped me. I reached the podium and looked at the screen. Before you announce what this hotel is worth, perhaps we should clarify what exactly you're valuing. The room went quiet. Gerald stepped forward. This is a private business matter. I looked at him. Then you shouldn't have invited the press. Several reporters raised their cameras. Colum stared at me. Dad, what are you doing? I turned toward him. Something I should have done a long time ago. I pointed toward the screen. That $27 million figure isn't the value of this building. Gerald's face tightened. I continued. The number everyone has been celebrating is largely based on the value of the property beneath this hotel. A reporter called out, Are you saying the valuation is inaccurate? I'm saying the valuation has been misunderstood. I let the silence settle. The building, the rooms, the restaurant, the furniture, those things have value. I looked at Colum. But the extraordinary value you're boasting about comes from the land. Bianca suddenly whispered something to Gerald. He shook his head. No. I heard him clearly. He understood where this was going. I placed one folder on the podium. The land beneath this hotel has never been included in the ownership you believe you receive. Colum's face changed. What? I didn't answer immediately. Every camera was pointed toward us. Every investor was listening. Then I said quietly, And that land has never belonged to your family. Nobody moved. Colum stared at me as if he were seeing a stranger. Before we continue, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Because what happened after those words changed everything my son thought he knew about the hotel. My son finally understood why I had never fought them during those 7 days. But he still didn't know whose name was written on the land beneath his hotel. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Colum walked toward me. Dad, what does that mean? I opened the folder. It means you never owned the land. Gerald pushed past him. That's impossible. No, I said. What's impossible is that you believed a ground lease meant ownership. The room erupted with questions. I explained it plainly. Years earlier, I'd acquired the land and placed it under a carefully structured ground lease agreement. Callum had the right to develop the hotel and operate it under specific conditions. He could build, he could manage, he could profit, but the ground itself remained mine. I turned the first document toward him. My name is on the deed. Colum stared at the page. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Gerald grabbed another document. You can't do this. I didn't do anything to you. I pointed toward the papers. You pledged interests you didn't own. You represented projected land value as though it were yours. You made financing commitments against an asset you couldn't legally pledge, and you violated several conditions of the ground lease. The color drained from Gerald's face. Colum looked at him. Is that true? Gerald didn't answer. That was answer enough. Then Colum looked back at me. Why didn't you tell me? I took a breath. Because I wanted you to build something. I looked around the hotel. I didn't want to hand you a fortune and watch you believe you had earned it. His eyes filled. I thought you gave me this. I gave you an opportunity. That distinction finally landed. The 27 million wasn't a gift. The hotel operation itself was worth far less than the family had convinced themselves. The extraordinary value belonged to the land, and that land had remained mine all along. By that afternoon, lawyers had begun the formal process of shutting the hotel down pending review of the breached agreements and financial commitments. Guests were checked out. Staff were sent home. The champagne disappeared. The lobby that had been filled with applause that morning became eerily quiet. No guests. No music. No employees. Just rows of empty chairs beneath the chandelier. And then the calls began. Lenders. Investors. Suppliers. Banks. Colum's phone wouldn't stop ringing. By evening, he had many missed calls. The hotel was silent. But the silence inside that lobby was nothing compared to the noise coming from my son's phone. Gerald tried calling his banking contacts, but the answers were no longer polite. We need repayment. Your collateral isn't what you represented. Until the ownership issue is resolved, the facility is frozen. The investors pulled back. A supplier suspended deliveries. Another demanded immediate payment. Gerald's luxury cars and other assets suddenly became part of conversations he had never expected to have. Bianca discovered something worse. Her father hadn't simply invested in the hotel. He had borrowed against assumptions about what the hotel was worth. She confronted Gerald. You told me we owned this. Gerald snapped. We were supposed to. That answer destroyed whatever trust remained. Meanwhile, Colum kept calling me. Once. Then 10 times. Then 30. I didn't answer. By morning, my phone showed AT2 missed calls. A little after 8, I heard a knock. Colum stood outside. He looked nothing like the confident man from the grand opening. His eyes were red. His jacket was wrinkled. Dad. He swallowed. Please. I led him inside. You can fix this. I said nothing. Please save the hotel. I looked at him. Colum, I can help you understand what you signed. I can help you deal with the consequences, but I won't pretend you didn't sign them. He lowered his head. I thought it was mine. I know. I thought you gave it to me. I gave you an opportunity. His eyes filled. Then Bianca called him. I heard her voice through the phone. You should have known your father wouldn't let this happen. Colum stared at the screen. Something in his expression changed. He finally understood. For years, Bianca and her family had talked about the hotel as their future. But when that future disappeared, she wasn't asking how to save their marriage. She was asking why my property had been taken away. Gerald blamed Colum. Colum blamed Gerald. Bianca blamed both. And the family that had once celebrated together began turning against itself. For years, they had treated the hotel as proof that they had won. Now I was about to decide what would happen to the one thing they had never truly owned. The legal process took time. There were contracts to unwind, legitimate interests to settle, lenders to negotiate with, and obligations that had to be handled properly. I didn't rush any of it. When everything was finally resolved, I had a choice. I could sell the land, walk away, take the profit and forget the entire experience. Instead, I chose something else. I bought out the legitimate remaining interests and reopened the hotel myself. But I changed how it was run. No reckless borrowing. No promises built on imaginary revenue. No family members signing agreements they didn't understand. Employees received fair contracts. Suppliers were paid on time. The accounts were transparent. And every major decision was based on what the business could actually afford. The hotel became profitable. Not because someone called it a $27 million empire. Because it was finally being managed by people who understood what it was worth. Months later, I received a photograph from one of my managers. The lobby was full again. Guests were laughing. The restaurant was busy. The chandelier reflected across the marble floor. I stared at that photograph for a long time. It was the same building where my daughter-in-law had once handed me an apron and told me to enter through the back. Only now, nobody knew the story. I never gave interviews. I never publicly humiliated Colum or his in-laws. I simply rebuilt what they had nearly destroyed. That was enough. Several months later, Callum came to see me. He sat across from me in silence. Finally, he asked, "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. No. He looked relieved. Then I added, "But I won't rescue you from every consequence of choosing the wrong people." He nodded slowly. I continued, "Being my son doesn't give you the right to my property." He looked down. "But it will always give you the chance to become my son again." He cried. So did I. I looked through the window toward the hotel. The place Colum once believed was his inheritance had become something far more valuable to me. A lesson. Sometimes giving someone an opportunity is an act of love. But allowing them to believe they're entitled to everything you built can become something else entirely. And maybe that's why I never regretted walking away that night. I didn't lose a son. I lost an illusion of who he had become. If you were standing where I stood, would you punish your own child for what he did, or leave the door open for him to earn his way back? Subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place.